first. Okay, so when it comes to the ask tasks, what's going to happen is I'm going to share with you a final deadline. So don't panic about that. You've got 4 to work through at the moment, but towards the first or second week of May, I will give you a definitive deadline to have at least 4 in. So that's not a problem. When it comes to assignment 1, 20th of April at 9, that is cutoff time, absolute deadline, no leeway, no mercy given. That's IIE, not me. I would give you mercy, but IIE. Then the 16th of May at 9 o'clock, cutoff for assignment 2, and the 12th of June, 9 o'clock, cutoff for assignment for your summative assignment. So those are the only due dates that are absolute. So the ask tasks that I give you, the activities that I give you dates to help you keep on track so you don't get overwhelmed. But you know, life happens. So some weeks, you know, everything just, the wheels fall off, everything just falls apart, and you can't get your stuff done. That unfortunately happens, in which case, get your life back on track and then get back on track with your studying. So other weeks, you're going to have a fairly slow week where you can get a bit ahead in your working. So you can sort of go on further ahead, and that just gives you a bit of breathing room for when you've got a very busy week. Yes. So you are going to need references and citations for the ask tasks. Okay, so the first two, I'm just checking the first one, if you use any other resources, you will need to use references and citations. If it's all your own ideas, then that's fine. Ask task 2 is a test, so you don't need to worry about citing for that one. And then ask task 3, if you use someone else's sources, you will do some referencing. Okay, so let me just make a note to I will try and put up some resources to help you with your referencing, but the ask tasks, I'm not going overboard with the referencing. As I say, most of the time you actually probably won't use someone else's work. You'll probably just use your own knowledge. So there's not going to be a huge amount of referencing, but it's a really good chance to practice referencing without any huge consequences. So if you make a mistake, it's not going to be the end of the world. Referencing, remember, it actually is fairly simple. You know what? I'm going to do a little video on referencing. Essentially, if you use someone else's work, put in a citation and a reference at the end. If you use someone else's ideas, you just put in the surname, the year, and then at the end you put in a Harvard reference under your reference list. So I'll go through a little video. I'll do a little video for you guys. It's less complicated than it looks. No, you don't get a plagiarism report for the ask tasks. It's just a chance for you to practice. So, you know, if something goes awry, it's not the end of the world. No, no. So if you know, for example, Coria Bell, however you pronounce it, if that's correct, that would be pretty much general knowledge. I would not be surprised if you knew that off the top of your head. Let me put it that way. So that's fine. If you start talking about the first years of the implementation of Lubotsky's, however you pronounce his name, theory of the zone of proximal development, that even if you know it off the top of your head, I would say go get a reference. Okay, I will do that. You know, I think let me also do a little video on that. So Safe Assign is easy. You just click submit to databases. It automatically puts it through Safe Assign, and then you'll get a report. And then you just go through the report and you check that everything that's highlighted is either a very common term or has a reference. So I'll do a little video showing you that, but that's really all the plagiarism reports are. Yes, so there are 4 approaches and you have to choose 3 texts. So that would actually be 9 texts in total, if my maths works out. Okay, so I know I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail, but have I managed to assuage your worries for the moment? Or has the chat just gone down? Okay, great. So I just want to check, has everyone had a chance to find the YouTube channel and the YouTube videos? Okay, great. I'm sorry, I have fallen behind a bit because, you know, very hectic start to the year. So that is going to be populated with plenty of videos and all of these recordings. So there should be a lot of help. Okay, so Alyssa, hi, by the way, good to see you again. The videos are under more resources, videos, that has the link to them. Okay, so also guys, if you want more detail or you find that a video isn't covering enough, you just let me know. So, okay, let me turn this off. I think you all know that I'm a real person now. Now, learning unit 1, I think I did explain to you guys that I'll put the link up now. I did explain to you guys that the naming conventions are a little bit awry. Please don't worry about it. It just is one of those things that as we've updated the course, it's sort of been done in steps. So that's why it's a little bit, the conventions are slightly out. So with this, what we are doing is our main thing is to go over diversity. So diversity in the classroom, which is really important. Oh, thank you. And the teaching approaches. So I've done a video on diversity. And unfortunately, I'm sure, as you can tell, they're meant to be 5-minute videos, but I do like to talk. So just be aware of that. So diversity, we are looking at the idea that in a South African classroom, you're going to have a lot of diversity. And that's really great. We love that diversity. We, as teachers, can really tap into it. We can use it. We can really help our learners get a well-rounded education, and not just in the subject we're teaching, but showing them about the real world. And it's a really, really important tool, and it's something we should embrace. But it does make things more complicated because you have to take into account so many different types of diversity. Main one, obviously, race, culture, language. So the big things in terms of that is, when it comes to language, just remember, not everyone is going to be able to grasp the concepts at the same rate. And it is often not a case of they can't understand it because they just don't have the ability. It's because they don't have the language to understand it. So you are going to have a lot of second, third, sometimes even fourth language speakers in your class who aren't performing, not because they couldn't understand the concepts if it was explained to them in their language, but because they don't have the linguistic ability. So that does impact on your teaching. Now, I know what you're going to say. Okay, cool, Amy, but how do we deal with it? Tell me what the correct formula is. I wish I could. I really wish that I could tell you how to deal with diversity in the classroom. This is the best and definite way. There is no best and definite way. Yes. So home language speakers and first language speakers are very privileged. And it does have a huge impact. Having said that, of course, some of the second or third language speakers will speak English beautifully, absolutely beautifully. So the thing is, every class is going to be different, and there isn't one way to deal with diversity. So in a class where you've got a lot of second language speakers who are really struggling with the language, what you are going to do is you're going to apply different interventions there. So what you would perhaps do is you would use code switching. So you would, if you are able to, speak a bit in their home language and then switch to English. Or you might try and set like a reading comprehension on a passage that you can get in their home language and in English, so that they can read in their home language and then read it in English, so that at least they are able to start building up their English, because there's no use in moving on to how to analyze questions if they can't read the passage properly. So, that might work for one class. In another class, you might have second language speakers who actually really speak very well and don't need that at all. But you might have a couple of kids who are very neurodivergent, and they might be very hyperactive, or they might be incredibly literal, and that's going to have an impact on your teaching. So there isn't one size fits all, and nothing you do is ever going to be perfect. I wish there was a way to be perfect and to show you the best way to do things, and this is definitely going to work, but that doesn't happen in life. So why do we bother to tell you about this? We tell you about this because it's really important that you acknowledge it. And even if you can't get it perfect and you're not going to get it right 100%, at least you can make it better. And I'm sure some of you will remember, for example, back in the day when we were at school, it was a one-size-fits-all package of delivery where, you know, those kids who were hyperactive or were easily distracted were told to, you know, sit down, straighten up, pay attention. And that was it for dealing with neurodivergency in your class. And home language versus second language, well, you either get it or you don't. I'm not saying all teachers were like that, obviously. Teachers have always cared, but we didn't really acknowledge diversity so much. The class was sort of seen as a homogenous thing. So just being aware, for example, if you're aware that you've got a kid with severe ADHD, you're not going to get angry with them when they start jiggling their leg, even if it's the last lesson on a Friday and it's hot as all get out there, and you swear if that kid jiggles that leg one more time, you are going to crack like a 3-minute egg. If you are aware of what is going on, you can mitigate the problems. You can deal with them. So you know what you might have to do is take a big rubber band, stretched around the legs of the chair, and the child actually is just got to sit in the corner and jiggle their legs on that rubber band. Or you might give them some Play-Doh or a stress ball, something like that. Yes, so that is great at schools that are accommodating these students, and most schools are really trying. Having said that, as I say, it's not going to work 100% of the time, and in mainstream schools, you've got a class of 30, 40 kids. You'll find it might well be a little bit of ADHD. There. So yeah, you know what it's like to be that person. And wouldn't it be great if people knew what was going on? Yeah. And the thing is, it's things like ADHD are now just actually being recognized. I think we do overdiagnose a bit, and we probably definitely over medicate, but it's just that we're now recognizing the different ways in which ADHD is manifesting. And honestly, sometimes, yes, you just have to sit down, shut up, and pay attention. But at least if that is the case, you can also be a bit more gentle with them. At least let them be seen and heard. So in a mainstream school, for example, you are definitely going to have kids with ADHD, but they've still got to sit for exams, for example. So they've got to learn how to do it, but you're not going to, lose your mind every time they're distracted or wriggling about. At least you know what is going on, and it can help your approach, and it also helps you build a good relationship. And yeah, that is very true. Women are seriously underdiagnosed because a lot of girls don't show the hyperactive component of ADHD, so they just sort of get shrugged off and say, well, you're just a daydreamer. Yeah. And it's a slow move for some schools. Yeah, and you find that there are actually a lot of women in their 30s and 40s who are now being diagnosed with ADHD. And if you look back at your high school and your primary school and you think, if I had known about it, if I had been given coping mechanisms to deal with that, how much easier would school have been? So acknowledging diversity, acknowledging these things is so important. And also, when it comes to things like ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, which is also, you know, quite common. It's a lot more common than people think, because a lot of people who are just slightly on the spectrum just don't ever get noticed as being on the spectrum. So these are the sort of kids who might, for example, take things a lot more literally. So, you know, these are the kids who are going to fight you when it comes to idioms. Now, if you are aware that there are people who process information very literally, hopefully they'll help you have a little bit more patience with them. And also, when you're doing literature, for example, you know to give a little bit more time to explaining literary language. And when it comes to poetry, if you've got 3 kids in the class who just really are struggling with poetry, one of the things you might want to look into is how are they coping with the idea of metaphors, with figurative language? Is it something there that they are really struggling with, and that's why they are battling with the poetry? So one of the things you can do to mitigate that, for example, is use visuals. I always like to use visuals. So when we're doing imagery, I always show an image of the thing, and I explain how this image, a literal picture, this image relates to what the poet is describing, and that helps. So that's diversity in the classroom. As I say, you cannot reach every child. You cannot reach every child every time. But the more aware you are, the more you are able to accommodate them, the more you are able to fit your lessons to suit most of your learners. And even in those instances where, you know, you can't really accommodate them, you can at least let them know that they're not on their own. No, Megan, don't worry. And everything's recorded, so you can watch the recording of the beginning later. So colloquialisms, cultural examples, things like that are going to play a very big part. And then, of course, the difference between equality and equity, where it used to be that we thought treating children equally was the best way to go, because then everyone's equal. But that only works if everyone's the same at the beginning. So, you know, now we're trying to meet the kids where they are. Okay, so now we are moving on to the core language skills. And of course, I do not know why these slides, no matter what I do to them, they just cannot. Okay, you know what? Let's just scrap this idea entirely. So, not a huge fan of this whiteboard feature, but I prefer a real whiteboard. But let's go for it. So, there are 4 pairs of core language skills. So your first pair is listening and speaking. So those of you who are good at maths will know 4 pairs means there are actually 8 core skills. So listening and speaking, and then we have reading and viewing, and then we have writing and presenting, and then, we have structures and conventions. So what does that mean? Okay, core English skills, we've got 8 skills, cool story, bro. Let's look at it. So what do we teach in English? Here's the thing. When it comes to teaching English, we are not teaching students how to read Shakespeare. Yes, that is one of the things we do to students, is force them to read Shakespeare, but that's not the skill we're actually teaching them. What good is being able to read Shakespeare? What we are actually doing is we are teaching them how to read different texts. Now, first thing, of course, is, well, it's got nothing to do with me. That's not quite true, because if you look at Shakespeare, who has not ever felt jealous? Who hasn't considered doing something a bit underhand to get something they really want? Who hasn't felt that peer pressure from someone you really trust and you consider very highly to go through with something you know you shouldn't? Who doesn't know a teenager who hasn't acted stupidly? Hopefully, of course, you didn't end up murdering your wife with a pillow like Othello, or murdering the king like Macbeth, or killing yourselves like Romeo and Juliet, but we've all felt those emotions. But we're not just teaching them for the love of literature, which certainly we really want to impart to them, because that's why we teach English, because we love this so much. But the fundamental skill that we are really teaching is reading. Now, we are teaching them to read something that is a bit foreign to them. So it is modern English. I know they will fight you on this, but it's definitely not Old English, and it's definitely not Middle English. Those two don't even sound like English. That is modern English. What's in a name? That by which I call a rose would be as sweet. Sorry, I've gone blank for the whole thing. But that's modern English. So it's very old-fashioned, but it's forcing them to apply their reading skills, and it's forcing them to apply their knowledge that they have gained from reading other texts and apply it in a completely new way. And then, of course, the way we test them forces them to create an argument, to then write an argument, a coherent argument, and to express themselves concisely and coherently. So that's why we, for example, do Shakespeare. Same with poetry. We're teaching them to read. Why do we force them to write essays? We're forcing them to write essays not because we think they're all going to go and do creative writing one day, but we are forcing them to apply what they know about coherent writing in a different setting. Yes, this is being recorded. So what we teach in English in every aspect is not grammar and summary writing and advertising and cartoons. Yes, that is how we test, but what we are actually assessing are these core skills. Everything can be brought back to the idea of these core skills. So, as I say, when we do a listening comprehension, we are testing their listening skills, but we are also testing their listening skills when we play them the audio of a poet reading a poem, or when we play them the audio of the Shakespeare play. And if you think about it, listening skills are one of the skills that you desperately need in life. To be successful, you need to be able to listen and to evaluate and understand. So it's not just hearing the words, it's hearing the words, understanding the words, and then evaluating what you have heard. Same thing with speaking. We don't make them get up and do orals because we love to torture them. I mean, it's a bit of a bonus sometimes. I'm kidding, of course. But we do it to teach them how to speak in front of an audience, how to take ideas on a topic and to put them into a coherent, succinct, and interesting speech, and then be able to deliver that speech. And that, once again, core skill in life. Same thing with reading. They need to be able to not only understand how to read different types of texts, so they need to be able to look at a magazine article, a blog article, an email, a literary piece, and evaluate it on its own merits, and to apply critical thinking to that piece. So it's really, really important that they develop the ability to read different texts that we give them, and not just read them and go, okay, cool, memorize Othello killed his wife. Okay, cool, but then what? So we really are going to try and move them from just, okay, I can read an email, I can do a comprehension and get 50%, that's all I need. It's a case of you're going to be reading business reports, you're going to be reading emails, you're going to be reading social media posts. You need to be able to read it, look at it, evaluate what's happening, think critically about what's happening, and create an informed opinion. So that's the reading part. The viewing is literally viewing images. Now, it might seem a bit strange. English, that's all about the reading. But if you think about it, especially nowadays, our world is becoming so visual. So when it comes to anything that we read, how often do we read something that does not come without a visual image? Everything has visual images attached to it. And we need to be able to evaluate what those images are implying. So if you think about advertising, that's how we assess it. And it's probably the easiest to use as an example, is every image has some sort of implication, makes us think in some way, makes us react in some way. So we want our students to be able to look at an image and then decipher, well, what is this? How does this relate to the writing? What is this trying to make me feel? Is it successful? Exactly. And part of our job is to actually also explain to the learners what we're doing. So when they say, why are we reading Shakespeare? You now have an answer to why are we doing it. Why do we have to look at print adverts? We never read print. Well, that may be true, but you're transferring the skills. One day they might be in a company where they need to work on the company's social media, in which case they're going to have to be able to choose images and develop images and things like that. So you want them to have those critical reasoning skills. Also that transference of skills. Now, when it comes to presenting, what we are looking at here is presentation of information to an audience. So that can be a literal presentation that they do with a PowerPoint and a speech. That's the easiest one to think of, like the best ways to put together a PowerPoint, how to use tone, body language, rate of speech, etc. All very, very important. But also it's linked with writing because we are also looking at how do you present your argument. So how are you going to take these varied thoughts that you have and now take them and compress them into a structured, coherent narrative that makes sense. So when we are looking at something like a reading comprehension, obviously the first thing we think is, okay, we are doing the reading skills. Yes, definitely. But we are also working on writing skills and presenting skills because we are working on presenting that information that they need to in a way that makes sense and that answers the question. So that is the presenting side of things. And then we have structures and conventions. So that's grammar. The structure of the language and the conventions that we use. So do not be shocked if you aren't already in the classroom. Don't be shocked when you get there and you realize kids don't capitalize properly. And the apostrophe is dying a slow and painful death. And of course, my personal favorite. Oh yeah, no, I don't know what's gone on with the plural, the apostrophe that pluralizes things. It makes me cry. Oh, so I'll get to what a comma splice is. Oh yeah, love the Oxford comma. So my hobbies include cooking, my family, and my pets. Use a comma. Don't be a psycho. Yeah, I love the Oxford comma. So a comma splice is essentially when you're using a comma to separate two main clauses. Yeah, let's see grammar. So let me put it this way. If you should be using a full stop or a semicolon and you use a comma instead, that's a comma splice. So if I'd put a comma between use a comma, don't be a psycho, both of those stand on their own. They are main clauses. If I were to put a comma in there to join the two, it would be a comma splice. I always used I mean, there is the the grammar and language people are dying at the moment, and they are screaming at their screens, and thankfully they're on mute. But that is the quick cheats guide to what a comma splice is. I always use the analogy of a little ant between two cider blocks. So that is your comma. It cannot carry the weight of those two. So that's what a comma splice is. But yes. Okay, so structures and conventions. Now this is where it gets a bit interesting, is how should we be teaching grammar? Should we be teaching grammar discretely, which means on its own, which we have, you know, education is moving away from that sort of rote learning, chalk and talk. Everything needs to be interactive. We need to show the students how, we need to give them the tools and make them build it. But when it comes to grammar, there's a little bit more of a debate about what is the best way to teach grammar. So I'm sure a lot of you will remember writing out, you get a page with like 100 examples and you have to put the apostrophe wherever it's meant to go. And if you're someone like me, you know, I could sort of use grammar because I read a lot, but I didn't really know what the rules were until I started teaching. And that's when, obviously, when you teach something is the best way to learn it, and suddenly it made a lot more sense. Now, that's not to say that we must throw out all the grammar lessons where we say to them, this is the rule, memorize it, and here are 100 examples. I'm going to be honest, my take is that has its place. Those of you who are in the classroom already can attest that, for example, the apostrophe, it is now used to make words plural, apparently. I think eventually they're just going to have to change the entire language, and I don't know how they're going to do it. It's not going to make sense because kids just use it to create plurals for some reason. And actually, sometimes we just need to give them 100 examples of contractions and force them to put those apostrophes in. But here's the thing, you don't stop there. Once you have taught them the rule and force them to memorize it, because then when they go, oh, where does the apostrophe go? They can literally recall the rule is, it is for omission and contraction, and it is for possession. Yes, that's where it is. Well, I'm glad that they're actually learning Afrikaans. They've learned something in Afrikaans because that's stuck in their heads, apparently. But once you've forced them to memorize that rule and you force them to do 100 examples with corrections, then what you do is you do a more learner-centered lesson where you put them into groups and you give them a punctuation mark, and they have to do a poster with an infographic, and they can do it on Canva, or they can do it on whatever software you have available to you. They can do a beautiful infographic on that punctuation mark, and then they can present it to the class, and you can print them out once you've checked them and stick them up in your classroom. So that is a fantastic way to get a sort of learner-centered approach to grammar, but it only works once you've actually taught grammar. So those are the 8 core skills that essentially inform every aspect of English. So everything we do links back to one or more of those. So at this point, going to ask, do you have any questions about this section, these core skills? Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so how do you redeem? Now, that is an excellent question. And I hate to tell you, it is one of those things where there isn't one answer. There are certain things that you can do. Yeah. And I hate to tell you, it doesn't get better. So, it is a huge problem at the moment. And I wish I could give you an answer. I personally don't know. Because you do. One of the ways is you almost have to look at them as blank slates. Do not assume they know anything about, especially about grammar. And there are huge gaps that you're going to have to try and catch up. And the problem is, oh yeah, and with COVID, it has escalated out of control. Problem is you have to cover the new curriculum. So you have to teach them the grade 8 stuff. But if they don't know the grade 6 and 7 stuff, how do you get them to know the grade 8 stuff? And that is, and yes, and the further down you go, it doesn't stop. Now, once again, this is you have to take it class by class. Yeah, those of you who aren't in the classroom and looking at this, these are the challenges. These are the big challenges. Possibly the biggest challenge you're going to find. Yes. So what we've got is kids are not watching longer forms anymore. Now, I don't want to generalize and say that that's the case with all kids. It's definitely not. So you will get those students whose parents do read to them, those kids who don't have access to TikTok, whose parents do the homework with them, or at least check that they've done their homework. Yeah, yeah. And then you get the ones who are getting no support at home. And it's very easy to get very, very frustrated because it's enormously frustrating. And unfortunately, it's a bigger problem than we as individuals are equipped to deal with, because you've got the home life, so parents who might not be available to help them. Yes, that's actually a great idea. Yes, and the main problem is they cannot read the questions. That is the main reason for them struggling so much is they can't read the questions and then they can't answer them. So yes, things like subtitles, things that, you talk to other teachers and get ideas from other teachers and swap ideas with other teachers. None of us have the answer, but hopefully we've all got ideas that might be the answer for one kid. So we've got these problems where the parents might not be available. They might be so defensive because they might feel that, they work so much that they're not available, and that might make them feel they have to defend their child. I don't know, but they are very defensive of their children. You get parents who don't read very much, who don't sort of value that as a concept. You also get parents who put way too much pressure on their kids, and that just leads to anxiety. So we've got this strange dichotomy of kids who are unbelievably stressed and not doing the work. And then you've got COVID, which has destroyed. Yes. And then, of course, you get the teachers. So if you've had a class that had a teacher that really was not great with them last year, not only did they come into the teacher's class last year probably behind, then the teacher didn't try and catch up. So we've got all of these huge problems. Every class is going to be different. They're all going to have different challenges. Some are going to be really, really far behind, and they're going to be discouraged, and they're going to have a bit of an attitude because they don't see. They're defensive. They are so far behind that they've given up. You're going to have other classes that really want to catch up. And how are you going to fix these gaps while still getting through what you need to for this grade? Because at the end of the year, they are going to move on. 90% of them, whether they are ready or not, are going to move on. So this is the point where you have to start making decisions based on individuals, based on the class. Is this a class that is so far behind they can barely read? So you will get those classes, in which case, you know what? You have to go back to basics. You can't teach this year's work if they can't read. You'll have other classes that are behind, but you give them 3 lessons on grammar and they click and they're like, oh, okay, you've caught them up on grammar. And then you can move on ahead. So it's, once again, it's something to be aware of rather than have an ideal solution. And yes, it does get better. And, one thing I found teaching classes that struggled a lot is you don't always need to make huge strides. Even if you've gotten these kids to grasp some of these skills and they're better at it now than they were when they came into your class, that's a huge win. So don't discount the small victories as well. Okay, so that is my spiel for the day. It is 7 o'clock. I've got another meeting I've got to get to, and I know you guys have got other things you need to get to. So, first of all, thank you all for joining tonight. If you've got to go, really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please just send me an email. The other thing is, do you guys have any questions? Or any questions that you really, really need answered now? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to be on for another couple of minutes. If anything comes to you, please ask. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone. I love it that you guys are talkative, you're asking questions. That's fantastic. Keep an eye out for the videos, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.